I was clutching my diploma with one hand when I stumbled upon the shocking truth. As I stood there in my cap and gown, beaming with pride, it hit me like a brick. My family hadn't been stuck in traffic. Nope, they were chowing down at some backyard barbecue, cracking jokes around a sizzling grill. There I was, the solo star of the graduation show, and the stars that were supposed to be my family were too busy enjoying a feast to even bother to show up. Just 2 days later, my mother, the queen of calm, waltzed into my apartment like she owned the place. With the composure of a statue, she demanded I cough up $20,000 for my upbringing. I thought this was the moment when the ground would swallow us whole, the dramatic breaking point of our relationship. But hold on, it wasn't. The real havoc was yet to come when they returned with a truck. Oh, you won't believe what they stumbled upon that day. Growing up in an unassuming corner of Seattle had me believing that hard work and quiet perseverance were my golden tickets to recognition. My family dynamic felt like a sitcom, sans the laughs. I played the role of the diligent older sister, filling the gaps in our family life that no one dared to discuss. From the age of 15, I was a waitress at a local diner, pouring coffee and dreams into mugs while listening to greasy gossip. By 17, I was buying my own school supplies. Who needs parental support anyway? While I was shouldering responsibilities and adulting before my time, my younger sister glided effortlessly through life, basking in the golden glow of parental favoritism. She needed a ride. Bam! There was someone to chauffeur her around. Money. It magically appeared in her hands like it had been conjured by a fast food magician. It felt like everyone else got the easy route, while I was navigating the traffic of adult life blindfolded and steering with one hand. Fast forward to my apartment, a cozy little space that's more lived in than luxurious. It's got one bedroom, a slightly sagging second-hand couch, and a thin carpet that could almost be classified as a rug. But guess what? It's my sanctuary, every piece crafted from hours of grafting at the cafe, the smell of roasted coffee a constant companion. My desk drawers were chock full of bills, proving that I fought tooth and nail to make it through college without drowning in debt. Graduation was supposed to be this huge celebratory confetti explosion. For me, it felt more like a countdown to disappointment. Each day leading up to the big moment, I told myself, this is it. They'll show up. I pictured my mom waltzing in with flowers, my dad awkwardly tearful, and my sister pretending to care while rolling her eyes. I even scoped out the best spot for photo ops under the golden sunlight. But, of course, the universe had other plans. 2 days before the grand ceremony, I casually mentioned to my sister where I'd like to eat afterward. Instead of the expected enthusiasm, she just laughed, making me wonder if I was missing some divine joke. My mother didn't even ask about the ceremony. She simply inquired about my work schedule like it was just another mundane Thursday. They never once uttered those 3 little words, "I'm proud of you." That's when the warning bells should have clanged in my head, but hope is a relentless little beast, and I clung to it like a drowning swimmer holding onto a life raft. If only I had glimpsed the tidal wave of demands waiting for me after graduation. If I'd known how my family would want to cash in on my newfound success, I would have braced myself a hell of a lot better than I did. But isn't hindsight a cheeky little friend? At least I could count on the inevitability of unpredictable family drama, and boy, was it coming my way. Graduation day arrived with all the fanfare and bloated expectations, but for me, it felt more like standing alone in a bustling food court while everybody else feasted on joy. I arrived nice and early, keenly hoping my family would pull through, for once. I fiddled with my gown, adjusting the cap so much you'd think it was auditioning for a dramatic role. A gazillion glances toward the entrance later, and I was about a hair's breadth away from developing a severe case of heart palpitations. With every door that swung open revealing a thrilling new void, it became clearer this was not a traditional start but rather an ironic detour. As the ceremony kicked off, I conjured up a series of excuses I could latch onto like a buoy at sea. Surely they were just stuck in gridlock traffic, or gaping at a squirrel in the parking lot. Perhaps my mom was flipping through her chaos-laden purse, And my sister? Well, she was definitely conquering the lost art of oversleeping. These justifications were grasped like a life raft, but when I stepped onto that stage, facing the sea of unfamiliar faces, all those excuses washed away. The applause was warm but akin to cotton candy, sweet but empty. I forced a smile, my go-to survival tactic, like wearing armor in a battle without a visible enemy. Post-ceremony, I stood near the iconic fountain, the hot spot for family photos amid jubilant laughter and well-deserved celebrations. Clutching my diploma like a lifeline, I traced its embossed lettering while my phone buzzed with relentless anticipation. My mentor, sensing my plight, strode over with a friendly suggestion for a picture. I chuckled awkwardly and sold her the lie they're on their way, while my insides twisted like pretzel dough. It felt like pricking myself with a needle while pretending I was fine. Time passed painfully. 20 minutes felt like hours, turning into a never-ending cycle of disappointment. All around me, the campus echoed the glee of graduates leaving with their families, while I stood there like a forgotten trophy. My mentor's glance bore a tenderness that made my throat constrict. "I'm okay," I managed to say, knowing full well I was not even close to it. Somewhere within this cocktail of sadness, my fingers strayed to social media. I guess distraction seemed a little more palatable than facing the glaring truth. Scrolling through my feed was a risky endeavor, but the first thing that grabbed my attention was my sister's shimmering story, a backyard barbecue with smoke swirling like ambitions never realized. There they were, cheering and flipping ribs as music blasted in the backdrop, the caption emblazoning the self-made rule, family first. I stared, the world faded into silence. Not angry, not heartbroken, but settled into a dull, weightless numbness that felt like trying to catch a slippery fish with bare hands. That evening slipped into the night, and no words came from my family. Silence hung over me like an unwanted shadow. When I finally got a text from Mom the following morning, it wasn't a congratulatory cheer but rather a request to call me when you get a chance. My heart thumped with dread as I called during a brief cafe break, the espresso machine hissing like a disgruntled cat. Surrounded by hums of mundane chatter, every ring pulled at me with anticipation. On the third ring, her voice greeted me not with pride, but with a calmness that set off alarms in my head. Though she seemed poised, her words were anything but celebratory. They had been discussing my future. It sounded strangely ominous. When she dropped the "you owe us $20,000 for raising you" bombshell, I felt as though I'd slid from a roller coaster into a pit of molasses. No anger, no embarrassment, just a casual tone as though she asked me to pick up a carton of milk. Did I mishear her? My response was a mix of disbelief and confusion, leading me to request a repeat, hoping desperately that she'd rephrase it in a way that didn't shatter the remnants of my graduation bliss. But she wasn't budging. The truth was there, spelled out slow and steady like a tortoise racing through molasses, and I had no choice but to face the music. I stepped into the alley behind the cafe, leaning against the old brick wall while my mom droned on about sacrifices. Apparently, raising my sister was now costing their savings. This wasn't just a wine session, it was an ultimatum. Suddenly, a small shift occurred in me, like a tooth turning in a keyhole. Little did I know that this was just the prelude to the whirlwind adventure that lay ahead. The real plot twist was a mere 2 days away, brewing ominously in the back of a truck as it rumbled toward my apartment. My mom's words clung to me as I trudged home after my shift, 20 grand hanging over my head like a stormy cloud. She spoke as if my childhood was merely a tab to be settled, and I had just been reminded of the bill. Talk about a reality check. As I crashed onto my couch, I surveyed the folders piled up like a chaotic mountain beside my desk. There were payments, bills, and loan records, evidence of my struggles over the last 4 years. Nights spent working late, my well-intentioned but wildly unbalanced life more akin to a sad circus than a cozy family tale. The cards I laid out were a chilling testament to my self-sufficiency, and deep down, a righteous indignation simmered beneath the surface. Yet guilt has a way of guising itself as a sly shadow. No matter how much proof I had, my mother's voice echoed in my mind, You should be grateful." Her insistence that raising me was worth something felt like a punchline to a joke I never found funny. I sat there long after sunset, dissecting a strange reality where a family gazed at each other like bank statements, not human beings. Just when I was about to let it slide to avoid the inevitable fight, my phone buzzed with a fresh text from my sister. Mom's message rang loud and clear, "You'll pay it. Just send it." It was all about her wants, her life, and suddenly, an angry breath slipped from my lips. Not the fire and flames kind of anger, but a cool, calculated resolve that felt oddly liberating and unsettling at once. In that moment of clarity, I realized the fakery had fizzled away not just in my relationship with my family but inside my very soul. Every flimsy excuse, every tiny hope for change crumbled, leaving behind a new sense of self. A boundary emerged, and I felt the power shift within. Without thought, I typed a single, defiant word, no explanations, no apologies. A treasure worth its weight in strength. Minutes later, my phone lit up with my mom's frantic calls. First confusion, then annoyance, and finally, fury crept into her voicemail, like a frantic symphony of entitlement. My father joined the chorus with his stern demands. I muted my phone and watched their calls stack up like a ledger of their own expectations. The morning brought a final message from my mom, "If you won't pay, we'll come get what we need." I couldn't help but feel that perhaps it was time for a real family meeting. The moment I heard the words "will bring the truck," a chill slithered through me. I pictured them arriving for a cheerful family gathering, but reality hit like a cold slap. They weren't coming to share stories or give me a surprise gift, they were coming to collect their prize meat. Apparently, they were oblivious to the fact that they were woefully mistaken about what they could collect from me. But instead of fear, I felt determination surge in my veins. They were in for quite a surprise. It was a typical Saturday morning, around 9, when tranquility usually reigned over the hallways of my building. But not today. I could hear the growl of their truck echoing through the thin walls as if a beast had arrived at my doorstep. Peeking out my window, I was greeted with a sight that made my heart pound. The truck blocking the entrance, a fortress of familial invasion. There was my mother, arms crossed like she was the queen of the universe, while my father leapt out, acting like he owned the whole street. My sister, of course, had her phone ready for the dramatic moment of the year. Standing there on the second floor, I could feel their presence like an electric charge, pulling at my old habits of submission and avoidance. There was that urge to curl up and disappear, but this time was different. I felt like a calm before a storm ready and waiting. Then came the unmistakable knock on my door, aggressive and demanding. My mother's voice sliced through the air, sharp and impatient, "Haley, open up. We're not playing games today. Here we go." As I cracked my door open, my mother practically bulldozed her way in, followed by my father's skeptical scan of my apartment. My sister lurked at the entrance, phone recording what I assumed she thought would be a family showdown. I couldn't help but notice how my mother inspected the place with disappointment, as if my neatness was a personal affront. "Let's make this easy. You owe us 20,000. You said no, and now we're here to collect." Wow, talk about a one-way street of entitlement. With each word, I felt my resolve harden. I had laid out the evidence of my past few years' payments and bills, all carefully organized, ready for this very moment. "You're not taking anything," I announced, my voice steadier than I expected. My father's scoff was as predictable as his fuzzy pajama pants, but I wasn't backing down. "Yes, I do." My mother's narrowed eyes were a familiar sight, one that turned my insides. "Don't make this harder. Too late for that." I slid the folder toward my father, who began flipping through the statements. "Rent, utilities, everything. You didn't contribute a cent." I could see the confusion knitting his brows. Across the table, my mother stared like a hawk, waiting for me to crack, but I stood tall. Watching my sister's bemused expression, I knew they were both realizing this wasn't the episode they'd signed up for. Just when I thought things couldn't get more intense, A knock echoed at the door behind my sister. My heart raced. Who could it be? Suddenly, there stood my university mentor, as calm as a lake on a serene day. I had summoned her like a guardian angel, knowing she'd witnessed my struggle. "Is everything okay here?" she asked, her steady gaze making my mother bristle with annoyance. This was turning into my personal reality show, and I had front row seats to the drama of my life. With a knowing gaze, my mentor directed his attention to me instead of Haley. She had a request. Out came a sealed envelope, which she placed carefully on the table. Inside was the confirmation of my academic achievements and financial aid history. My mother flinched slightly, a small yet telling gesture. As I opened the envelope for everyone to see, all the proof was laid bare: scholarships, work-study hours, part-time wages, a grave reminder of how little my family had contributed. The tension crackled in the air like static electricity as my father's jaw tightened. Meanwhile, my sister had finally put her phone down, sensing the gravity of the moment. My mother, desperate for a comeback, declared, "We still raised you. That has value." I met her gaze with an unwavering stare, countering, "Then why didn't you show up for the one day that value mattered?" Suddenly, the silence was so profound you could hear a pin drop like an awkward pause in a sitcom's punchline. Her expression hardened, and with a sharp command, she told my father to gather his things. Initially, he just sat there, flipping through the pages of my academic records as if they were pages from a magazine. Then, with a heavy heart and without a single word, he got up and walked out. My sister hesitated, casting me a look that said a million things but left her speechless. Finally, she too shuffled out, her phone drooping uselessly in her hand. From my window, I observed them pile into the truck, watching the whole scene unfold like a slow-motion movie. The engine roared to life, the tailgate slammed shut, and there they went slowly rolling away, taking only memories and leaving empty space in their wake. A thick silence enveloped my apartment, but it felt different this time, lighter, like the aftermath of a storm that had finally passed. I closed the door with delicate precision, the sound echoing like the last note of a long-overdue symphony. The weight of guilt no longer sat heavy on my shoulders. Instead, I felt a liberating rush of freedom wash over me, a refreshing sense of independence. I gathered the folders on the table, not because I needed to prove my accomplishments any longer, but to acknowledge that these papers now represented my resilience, my hard work, my life as I wanted it to be. Later that day, with a newfound sense of purpose, I strolled down to the nearby hardware store. I picked out a shiny new lock, substantial, satisfying, and oh so good to the touch. As I fastened the lock onto my door, there was something grounding about the cool metal beneath my fingertips. When the deadbolt slid home with a decisive click, it felt like I was drawing a line through a chapter of my life that had needed closing. In the following days, I waited for guilt to creep back in, but it never arrived. Instead, I was greeted by a quiet pride, a thrum of strength that told me I had not been selfish, I had simply been long overdue for a little self-love. My family may have left empty-handed, but I moved boldly into my new existence with something they could never seize: my boundaries, my future, and above all, my voice.